Hello everyone and welcome back to TowerGate. It is TowerGate day number 1159, 1159, June the 12th, 2020. Thank you so much for tuning in. It's Friday. My goodness. It looks like we're going to have a beautiful weekend here in southern Ohio. I hope you guys do as well. Nice and sunny, clear skies, because we have rain the last 2 or 3 weekends. And low humidity as well. Canadian air. It's going to be a wonderful weekend. Hopefully it's the same wherever you live. And hopefully you live in a red state. If you live in a blue state or a blue city, I don't know what to tell you. Anyway, I've got some words about that later. Let's go ahead and get to the news of the day. Well, Dan Bongino drew a very, very interesting conclusion from a lot of things that we've learned over the past weeks, months, and even years. And it's a connection that I haven't heard anybody draw before. I don't even think I've stumbled across this yet. But it's very interesting, and it relies on a little bit of happenstance, but it's certainly worth considering. And so he's talking about the fact that we had learned recently that Stefan Halper, the fat man, that his handler was this FBI agent, Stephen Soma. Now, Soma is the FBI agent that seems to be getting protection. He's also the one who was identified in the IG report as having made the overwhelming majority of mistakes. He's the one who prepared the application for the Department of Justice to sign off on the Carter Page FISA warrants. So Halper is being handled by Stephen Soma. Now, that in itself is pretty interesting because we're finding out now that Soma, who's being protected by the FBI, they don't want to allow Lindsey Graham to interview him or question him. So, in itself, the fact that he's Halper's handler and he appears to be the one who had the most, let's just say, mistakes in preparing the FISA application, he's Halper's handler. That kind of puts those two in a box. Now you also have what we've known for a very long time, for a couple years now, that Christopher Steele was being handled by Mike Gaeta. So we learned a long time ago that Gaeta was the handler for Steele, and we've recently learned that Soma was the handler for Halper. Now here's where things get interesting. It turns out that Soma worked with Gaeta in the same New York FBI field office recently. Soma working with Gaeta in the same FBI New York field office. Soma handling Halper and Gaeta handling Steele. And they worked together at the same FBI field office. So it would only stand to reason that they probably know each other. And they're both involved deeply in Operation Crossfire Hurricane. Gaeta is the one who's meeting with Steele over in Rome. Soma is handling Halper, who's spending a lot of time in the UK. We also learn that this very same New York field office, where both Soma and Gaeta worked together, had received a copy of the so-called Steele Dossier on July the 28th of 2016. So when you take all these facts and you put them together, and it does require a little bit of imagination, and it does require a little bit of some guesswork, and you have to, we don't know this to be a fact, but it's kind of circumstantial. It stands to reason. I think it's reasonable to conclude that these two guys knew each other, that Soma and Gaeta know each other. Soma handling Halper, Gata handling Steele. They both work at the same FBI field office, and it's that very FBI field office that obtains a copy of the so-called Steele dossier on July 28th of 2016. Notwithstanding the fact that according to Strzok and McCabe, the FBI did not actually see the Steele dossier, the so-called Steele dossier, for the first time until sometime in September of 2016. So we're supposed to believe that this FBI field office has the first couple of memos, which at this point, remember, the Steele dossier is still being written. But on July the 28th was when the first two memos were given to Gata by Steele. And then that ends up, and remember, Gata, he's over in Rome. But the first two memos given to Gata by Steele in early July of 2016 end up on July 28th at the same FBI field office where Gata and Soma work together. And Soma is working out of that office. This is where Soma works. He works at this FBI field office. And Gata used to work there with Soma. So now, as I have said and speculated on many times in the past, I've said I would not be the least bit surprised to find out that Steele and Halper know each other. They run around in the same groups of people over in London. They both know a lot of the same people. They're connected to a lot of the same people. It's hard to believe that Steele and Halper do not know one another. And as you know, the so-called Steele dossier, when it started showing up in Rome in July of 2016, there had already been what Lee Smith describes as these proto-dossiers, which are in his book, which I read right here and showed you. I actually put it up in front of the camera and showed you these proto-dossiers which Lee Smith was able to get. And these things were floating around Washington, D.C. around May. Middle part of May is when they started showing up. They were out there 6 to 8 weeks before the Steele dossier started showing up, at least the first two memos, which were all that were available from Steele in July of 2016. So you start to question at this point whether or not Halper may have been a much bigger player in the dossier information. In fact, he's never been mentioned as being someone who had anything to do with contributing to the so-called Steele dossier or the dossier information. But when you look at these relationships and the time frames, it's certainly logical to conclude that Halper may have been a contributor, because the dossier shows up July 28th in this New York field office. But the players at Main Justice, Peter's been stroking us, Loose Lisa Page, McCabe, say that they didn't come into contact with it until somewhere around September. So for what, 5, 6, 7 weeks, it's floating around here at this FBI office in New York, but they haven't seen it in Washington? And it's in the hands of Soma, who is Halper's handler. So I think it's pretty logical to conclude that it's possible that Halper may have been a source for the dossier. He may have been the person who wrote or had something to do with the first two memos in the dossier. It may turn out that he is much more of a player than we even knew, and he's already a big player. He may have been a source for Steele. He could have been one of Steele's primary sources. He could even be the mystery subsource that Horowitz wouldn't tell us about, that the FBI still will not tell us about, and that we've not learned about from Barr or Durham's investigation. Of course, that's not the type of thing that they would leak out if they knew it. But if it is true, they probably know that. Because my guess is They've already looked into Halper. May have even questioned Halper at this point. My guess is they've questioned Soma, or they certainly will. But there's something here that's very, very, I don't know. It's, to me, it's a flashing light. It's a warning signal. It's like, hey, look here. There's too much going on with these relationships. Soma is Halper's handler. Gaeta is Steele's handler. Soma is working out of this New York field office where Gaeta used to work with him. This New York field office gets the dossier 4, 5, 6 weeks before Strzok, Page, and the bunch over at Main Justice and D.C. admit that they saw it. And Halper and Steele run around with a lot of the same people in the same places who have a lot of similar objectives. There's something else going on right here. There is something going on right here. Can't put my finger on it. Bongino's right. There's no way that there's nothing going on here. There is definitely something going on with this. Exactly what it is, whether Halper is a source for Steele, whether Halper was giving information to Soma. For some reason, Soma's sitting here in New York with the dossier before anyone else got it. Steele was first gave it to Gaeta. And all of a sudden it ends up in New York, where Gaeta used to be. And now Soma's got it. But no one in D.C. has it. Something going on here. I expect that more will come out about this as more people begin to look at this. Certainly got my attention. So I'll let you chew on that one for a while. Well, it looks like Lindsey Graham's committee has voted 12-10 in favor of authorizing subpoenas to former Obama administration officials, the number of which is somewhere around 50. It would include Jimmy the Weasel Comey, Andy McCabe, Jimmy the Idiot Clapper, Mr. Potato Head John Brennan, Silly Sally Yates, and even Rodenstein's name pops up on that list. Yeah, they need to call him back. He's not done. Believe me. They're also going to be subpoenaing documents and other materials. Graham's committee is going to be focusing primarily on issues surrounding the FISA warrants on Carter Page and the general FISA abuse, and of course, Crossfire Hurricane, the predicate, and up to that point, probably up to the Mueller investigation. So, again, I'm not a big fan of Lindsey Graham. I think this is all about political grandstanding. There's a couple people on that committee that may give some legitimacy to it, and it may allow for us to learn some new things. But probably what's most important, and unfortunately they will not ask the right questions, they will not actually close the deal when they've actually got a chance. I'm convinced we're going to see more of what we saw with Rodenstein. But it is going to give us a chance to get some people on the record again. Now, most of these people have been interviewed before and have lied. But now, Durham's got his criminal investigation going, and he'll probably be paying close attention to these hearings. It's going to be a little tougher for them to lie now, because they know that Durham has probably already got information, and he'll know if they're lying. And they could be looking at some issues. I also expect that a lot of these people are not going to be very forthcoming. I expect they're going to have a full legal team with them, and I expect that legal team is going to be advising them not to answer a lot of questions. And I wouldn't be surprised if some of them flat out take the fifth and don't say anything. That would be my advice, especially to James Comey. James Comey's smart. He won't say a word because he's up to his eyeballs. Right along with Peter's been stroking us. Those are two guys that shouldn't say a word if they're smart. And as far as Rodenstein, of course, I've been talking about him since the testimony. A lot of people think that testimony by Rodenstein, okay, well, he obviously squirmed out of it and he's off the hook. No. All we got was Rodenstein's take. But you got to remember, he's at odds with McCabe, with Strzok, with Page, with the FBI in general. He's at odds with them. He's going to be at odds with the Mueller team. He's at odds with some of the people in the DOJ. It's by no means did Rodenstein slide off the hook here. Because these other people are going to be called and they are going to be asked about things that Rodenstein said, and they're going to probably disagree with him. So it's not like Rodenstein had his word and that's the final word on it. Oh no, there's going to be dozens of other people who are going to come in and they're going to be asked about some of the things Rodenstein said. And we still have the issue of the 25th Amendment and wearing a wire. And we've already got James Baker, who's testified twice under oath that, yeah, he talked about it and he was dead serious. We've got Luce Lisa Page and Andy McCabe, all these people. And there were other people in those meetings. It wasn't just them three. And these other people have likely been questioned too. And they say that Rodenstein did say that. So Rodenstein may have said in the hearings, when Mazie Hirono asked him, he may have said, no, I never talked about 25th Amendment. I never talked about wearing a wire. Well, you know what? There's 3 or 4 or 5, maybe half a dozen other people who are going to be called and who are going to say the exact opposite because they already have said the exact opposite under oath. They're not going to change their tune. So ultimately, Rodenstein, I mean, we've heard from him, but we're going to hear from dozens and dozens of other people in Graham's committee and in Johnson's committee who are going to take issue with the things that Rodenstein said. He's not off the hook by any stretch. He will be rebutted. Just watch and see. So it's not the end of the road for him at all. He'll be coming back because there'll be people who will be taking issue with things he said. And the whole time, you know, Durham's team is sitting back watching this and taking it all down because they've got additional information that we don't even know about. They probably know the truth about 99% of it at this point. Now, we're looking at this Ron Johnson committee coming up, and I thought I'd just kind of give you a heads up on what we might expect here. The thing about the Ron Johnson committee, although I think Ron Johnson's a much straighter shooter than Lindsey Graham, there's really not very many good people on that committee, to be honest with you, unless they expand it to include other people. But right now, you only really have 3 people who are reasonably good. And that is Ron Johnson himself might ask some pretty good questions. I think he's a fairly straight shooter. Rand Paul is on that committee, and I expect Rand Paul will, you know, do a pretty good job of asking some good questions. And Josh Hawley is reasonably good, and I expect he will ask some pretty good, tough questions. But you've also got a lot of, I guess you'd say, duds on that committee. That would include my senator, Rob Portman, who I just sent an email to 2 days ago about this issue that he's probably not going to like. Jim Lankford, and I don't like Lankford. I mean, Lankford to me is deep state. He might try to put on a show for the crowd, but he's not going to ask the decisive questions that expose the coup. He won't do that. But Lankford, I put him in the dud category. Smart guy, knows what's going on, but I think he'll pull his punches. Mitt Romney, of course, you can imagine he might as well be with the Democrats. Then you've got Rick Scott, and you know, Rick Scott to me is wambly mambly. You know, I mean, he's better than a Democrat, but not much. I'm not a big fan of Rick Scott, and I know Trump praises him a lot, but I don't expect Rick Scott to be, you know, I don't expect he's gonna make any waves. I think he's kind of a go along, get along. He's in a swing state. I think he's going to cover a 6, and I don't expect. I'll be surprised. I hope I'm surprised. I hope I'm pleasantly surprised. Maybe Rick Scott will show up for the occasion and actually ask a good question or two. But I wouldn't put any money on it. And then you got Enzi, who's again just sort of, you know, bland. I don't expect he'll do much. I think the person to watch on this is actually the Democrat, and that would be Kristen Sinema. Because Kristen Sinema is a bit of a... She's a Democrat. She's a liberal Democrat. But she's a bit of a sort of... she doesn't always walk in lockstep with the Democrats. She's got a bit of a libertarian streak in her. And she's a little wild. She's a little bit off the reservation. If one Democrat, and she would be the only one on that committee, decides to go a little rogue, Because if she sniffs something that's really, legitimately, bad, she's one that might, on the Democratic side, ask a few tough questions. So I would say the person to watch might be Kirsten Sinema. So Grassley and Johnson, we talked yesterday about the fact that DNI Ratcliffe had released some new documents, and now we know what at least one of them are, and some of them I should say, because Grassley and Johnson released yesterday that a newly distributed memo, which shows that the intelligence community knew that the Steele dossier was garbage back in 2016. Essentially, what he released and what Grassley and Johnson released was the Annex portion of the intelligence community assessment, which is the part where they start talking about Trump working with Russia, and all the dossier stuff is in that Annex that goes along with the ICA, which is largely what was used to propel the Mueller investigation. So, despite the fact that we now know from this Annex A portion of the ICA, despite that information proving that the Steele dossier was complete garbage, they still used it to obtain the FISA warrants on Carter Page, and they used it, quite honestly, to get the Mueller investigation. And if the truth be told, it was really the primary driver of Crossfire Hurricane. They had to create the Papadopoulos Downer thing because they couldn't use the dossier. But it was really what was used for the dossier was really behind the impetus for Crossfire Hurricane as well. But it's most important to think about it in terms of the fact that it launched the Mueller probe. And now we know that the portion of it that we weren't allowed to see, this Annex A, says that the dossier was produced for private clients. Now, it does not name them, although they knew that it was the Rotten Reverend Clinton and the DNC, one and the same. It doesn't say the Rotten Reverend Clinton and the DNC, but it does say that the dossier was produced for private clients. It also says the dossier was highly politically sensitive and mostly uncorroborated. Also, that it might be Russian disinformation. So the FBI did receive intelligence reports saying the dossier was inaccurate and part of the Russian disinformation campaign. Now, despite that, the FBI renewed the Carter Page FISA warrant the same day that they received these intel reports, saying that the dossier was inaccurate and it may be part of Russian disinformation campaign. In fact, they stated it was part of a Russian disinformation campaign that was completely ignored, and they went on to get a Carter Page FISA renewal on the very day that they received this information. This also confirms that the FBI knew the dossier was garbage well before Uncle Bob the Executioner Mueller took over the Russiagate probe. Remember, all that Mueller did, really, was come in and replace Comey. In a nutshell, that's what happened. And they took the Crossfire Hurricane counterintelligence operation and turned it into a Mueller criminal investigation. Without merit, without warrant, without evidence. It was a dossier which they had known and been proven time and time again, not just by the FBI itself, but now the intel community as well. And we know this because of the release of this Annex A of the ICA. This is coffin nails for some individuals. Coffin nails. Now, something I find pretty humorous is that in response to Lindsey Graham getting these subpoenas, we now have Chuck the Cuck Schumer saying that he's going to subpoena Papadopoulos, Michael Flynn, and Michael Cohen. Well, Michael Cohen has already appeared in front of Congress, testified, and lied about a dozen times. no one takes him seriously, and he's not going to rock the boat anymore. That guy just got out of jail, and he doesn't want to go back, and you can bet that he's going to play it very, very close. He's not going to rock the boat any way, shape, or form in any direction. He's just going to try to get out of there with as little damage as possible. Papadopoulos and Flynn, I can't believe that Chuck the Cuck thinks that's going to work out well for the Democrats. These two guys are going to sit there. Remember, they're clean as a whistle. They're going to lay out what happened to them. They're going to tell their story, and they're dying to tell their... I know Papadopoulos is. He's thrilled. Go look at his Twitter feed. He's absolutely thrilled that he's finally going to get a chance to sit in front of a committee and tell them exactly what was done to him. There's no upside there for the Democrats whatsoever. And everything that we've seen so far exonerates Papadopoulos. And we've seen pretty much everything now. And Michael Flynn, I assume that his case is going to come to an end on Friday, or today actually. I assume that the appeals court's going to shut that down, and he should be free to speak. Now, there'll probably be some civil lawsuits coming and some other legal action coming from Michael Flynn on the offense, and so he may be advised to, not say certain things, but I'm sure that Michael Flynn is going to give that committee an earful of exactly how he, like Papadopoulos, was abused by the FBI and the deep state. So that's all good news. Well, we had the latest installment from Project Veritas yesterday, where they interview the top two people from this group, Refuse Fascism, which is closely aligned with all these other groups funded by Soros and others. They're in the same group with Black Lives Matter, Antifa. They're very, very similar to Antifa. They're just a splinter group of Antifa, essentially, called Refuse Fascism. And so they got an undercover reporter, and they're talking to two of the primary leaders of this group. One is a guy named Andy Z. He should, based on that video, be arrested, picked up, at least questioned. I mean, a guy like that, along with this other, the number two person, I guess second tier person, this T. Stern, this is a woman, T. Stern, both of these two should be picked up by the FBI and questioned. They should be tagged, and they should be, their calls monitored. They should have a cop watching them everywhere they go, watching it. These two should come under complete surveillance now, and they'll eventually break the law, and that's what you do. You got to get on these two people, because they're two of the primary shakers and movers behind this group. But in the interview, in the undercover interview, we actually have these individuals talking about the fact, and this video is focusing on the funding, where they get their money. And we have them saying that there are people in the Hillary Clinton campaign that worked with Refuse Fascism. They had gotten a grant from George Soros, but Soros rarely directly gives money to anybody. He always uses multiple straw men to move his money through these groups. He has many, many organizations that he uses. And so he'll put money to one organization, he'll go to the next, and to the next, and the next, and the next. He's very slick how he moves his money through many different organizations, knowing it's eventually going to wind up where the radicals are. He also said that they were talking to someone from Tom Steyer's campaign, and that it was Tom Steyer's main advisor was talking about making contributions. And they talk about the fact that their goal is to put thousands and eventually millions of people on the street, and their overall goal is to drive Trump and Pence out of office. These people don't believe in democracy, they don't believe in elections or anything else. They don't like the way the election turned out, they want to overturn the election, they want to overthrow the government. That is their bottom line. And they say it right there. That is all you need if you are the FBI. That is all you need right there if you are the FBI, to tag these two people and surveil them 24/7, watch everywhere they go, everyone they talk to, take it down, take notes, investigate everyone, and that is how you deal with that. That is how you begin to root it out where it grows. nip it in the bud. So with this release of this Appendix A of the ICA, I think that's coffin nails for Comey, because it proves that Comey deliberately lied to President Trump in that January 6th briefing at Trump Tower when he talked to him about the dossier. It proves that Comey deliberately misled and lied to Trump. That's coffin nails for Comey right there. It also shows that Comey was setting the stage for the news hook that led to the release of the dossier, which is what led to everything else. Then he also leaked his personal memos to his friend Daniel Richman. Comey, coffin nails for Comey. Comey is going to be charged with crimes. John Brennan, proven now that he definitely lied to Congress and knew a lot more about everything. He says he didn't learn about this stuff until, what, November, December? No. Brennan was aware of all of this back early in the summer. Well, midsummer, July. If the FBI had this information on July 28th at the New York field office, certainly the intel community had it at least at that time or earlier. Brennan and Comey are the two big losers with the release of this Appendix A of the ICA. It's coffin nails, really. I don't know how you... it's coffin nails. There's no way out of that. That's a slam dunk right there. So definitely Comey and Brennan, you can count on, are looking at criminal charges. Now, we have this deal going on up in Seattle. It appears now that this rapper warlord has taken over as the, I guess, police chief or whatever in their little autonomous zone up there in Seattle. So I wanted to talk just very briefly here before the video ends on how to deal with this sort of thing, because it's a very tricky situation. Because you want to be careful not to overreach, and it is a blue state, and we are in an election year. Things are very politically charged right now. You don't want to do anything that blows this thing back up again. It's very tricky how Trump handles it, and there's a couple ways he could do it. I think, though, he does have to take some action. We know that he called the governor, Inslee, who's a nut. He called Inslee, who apparently didn't even know that this was going on, from a press conference. And you tell him exactly what Trump told him. Hey, either you get a handle on this or I will. And now we're hearing that there's a couple cops that have gone back into that little autonomous zone and are now back in their precinct, and they're taking their precinct back. But they're now, the Antifa people now are, and BLM, who appear to be together on this, are now trying to amass a group of people to come and surround that little precinct again and try to drive the cops out again. So that's in flux right now. That's happening as I'm speaking to you now. But, this is not a hard situation to deal with. What Trump needs to do, at first I'd say he should not send in the military unless he absolutely has to. He doesn't need to. The president has access to 20, 30,000 federal agents. Remember, every agency of the federal government has militarized agents, whether it's Bureau of Land Management, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, Department of the Treasury, Department of Agriculture. Damn near every department of the government has their own, sort of law enforcement, militarized law enforcement. So I would start first by sending in federal agents. I would surround this little 6-block area, and I would let them know that no one's coming in and no one's coming out without going through a checkpoint. So number one, you stop any more people from coming in. And in about 2 to 3 weeks, they'll begin to starve to death. Not only that, there's going to be infighting that will happen as certain people within that group begin to strive for leadership. There'll be battles within, internal struggles, and they might end up killing each other. But when they get hungry, they'll come out. And when they come out, they go through a checkpoint. They have to walk out, drop their weapons, come out, go through a checkpoint. You sit them down, you get their name, all the information from them, you put them in the file, and you send them back home to mommy. In the meantime, you do want to have some military units on the ready in case reinforcements try to come and surround the cops. And you want to have something in place to make sure that doesn't happen. But you wait these people out. Nobody gets in, nobody gets out. Surround them. Let them sit there. Within a week or two, they'll begin to starve, and they'll come out. That's how you solve the problem, peacefully and quickly. Thank you so much for tuning in. See you guys tomorrow. Bye. Bye.